Well, the first thing that I would do is try to ensure that you didn't end up at 20 in that position. Now, it is a tragedy, but we do have in Scotland a high proportion of youngsters who are not in education, employment or training. What does that say? It says to me something fairly stark about our whole approach to education. Now, I don't think we've been getting education right in Scotland, and that is in no way to diminish what I think is a fantastic contribution made by our hard-working teachers, and I know a lot of them, and they're dedicated professionals. But it's a system. They're again working within an environment which is largely state-directed and state-controlled. And just to illustrate this, Alf, you may remember some weeks ago the quite appalling footage that appeared in our newspapers of a teacher being assaulted in a school, and this was being captured on a mobile phone. And it was appalling. In the Scottish Parliament, after this appeared, at First Minister's questions, Jack McConnell was asked by somebody in the Parliament about this incident, and Jack McConnell said yes, it was very serious, which it is, and he'd spoken to his Education Minister, which he had, and his Education Minister had met heads of education, and they discussed this, and his Education Minister was going off to have another meeting with another organisation and grouping. And I'm sitting in the Parliament saying, where have we got to in Scotland that our head teacher cannot sort this out in the school at the time and have the power and authority to do that? Why does it need First Ministers and Education Ministers having summit meetings? This is all about school environment, it's about governance, it's about discipline. And this is where I think we've strayed away from what I think was one of the excellent attributes of Scottish education, where our schools had a character of their own. I'm totally behind state education, Alf. I think it is the obligation of the state to provide quality state education. Going back to local government, I actually think the local authority should be the strategic decision maker as to how many schools it has in its area. But do I think we're required to do something about the governance of our schools and the powers of our head teachers and the meaningful involvement of parents? Yes, I do, because that has been neutered by Labour and the Liberal Democrats. I think our head teachers are people that we should admire and respect. They're consummate professionals. They're paid, I think, well, but then we ask them to do a very responsible job. So why do we tie their hands? Why do we restrict them and inhibit them in how they can actually run the school? And that's why, Alf, my party would come forward with a new Education Act. A new Education Act to redefine the role of a head teacher, give the head teacher and his colleagues far more say in what goes on in the school in terms of discipline, in terms of management of the school, not so much financial management as terms of the day-to-day management of activity within the school, curriculum. Now, it seems to me that a head teacher in a local area with the local authority, with the business community, will have a far better feel of what we should be trying to produce in terms of qualifying youngsters, so that, Brenda's a hypothetical individual at 20 with no qualifications, just lying in bed every morning, actually it doesn't happen, because many more youngsters are usefully involved and participate in education at the earlier stage. The other thing I'm very clear about is, I remember at school, even by the age of 13 and 14, there were some things that you were naturally interested in and other things you just didn't care about at all. I have seen youngsters in school aged 13 and 14 bored out of their minds, disengaged from the educational process. School is just a tedium, it's something you have to do because your parents send you there and you're getting zilch out of your attendance. I think there are many youngsters who may have slightly outgrown the school environment. Well, why don't we actively pursue vocational education for them? There's no reason, in Scotland why schools and our further education colleges can't work much more closely together. There's no reason why we can't identify youngsters who are maybe not making much of the traditional school curriculum, but could really benefit from a different environment and a different approach. And I think we need to look at that very urgently. But the other thing I'm clear about, Alf, is there is a real challenge with producing youngsters who A, are interested in studying, and B, have teachers to teach them in the sciences and technical subjects. And we're seeing the crop that we're reaping here because we're not sowing in the way we need to. And that's why one of the things my party would do is we would ask every local educational authority with their head teachers, with their further education colleges, to come up with a strategy for teaching science and technical subjects. Now maybe that's going to start schools pulling resource off. Maybe one school will say, we're actually very strong in sciences, but we're maybe weaker in modern languages. But that school is actually very strong on modern languages. So can we start maybe looking at how we maximise the resource we've got? Because somehow or other, we've got to make a sea change in increasing the number of youngsters who want to study these subjects, and we've somehow or other got to harness them into being in an educational framework where if they're minded to study these subjects, they actually now have channels through which they can do that.
Annabel, we're fast running out of time.